I can't go on. I'm lost, she collapsed. Hunter lifted her over his bullboat and carried her miles home. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the dense forest of the Pacific Northwest, where the trees towered like ancient sentinels and the fog clung to the earth like a blanket, Sarah stumbled through the underbrush, her body aching with exhaustion. She had been lost for days. The map she had been following had long since proven useless, the landmarks she had relied on obscured by a relentless stretch of wilderness. The only sound was the rustle of leaves beneath her worn boots and the occasional cry of a distant bird. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds, offered little warmth. Her legs burned, and her lungs ached with every breath, but she pushed forward. The harsh wind bit into her skin, and the cold seeped into her bones. She could feel the weight of despair pressing down on her. Sarah had been hiking for hours that morning when she had lost her way, and now, as the light began to fade, she knew she couldn't go much further. Her strength had left her. She stumbled and collapsed to the forest floor, her body giving in to the fatigue she had been fighting off for days. Her vision blurred, and her breath became shallow. She closed her eyes, hoping for relief, but the world around her was growing colder. That was when he appeared. Out of nowhere, a shadow emerged through the mist, tall, strong, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew this land better than anyone. The hunter had been tracking her for miles, aware of her presence before she even realized she was being followed. He had seen the smoke from her campfire earlier that day and had decided to investigate. When he found her lying there, her face pale and her body motionless, his instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, kneeling beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms, feeling the weight of her fragile form. He wasn't sure how long she had been unconscious, but he knew he had to act fast. Sarah stirred slightly, but she was too weak to speak. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, and she caught sight of his face. It was hard to make out in the dim light, but she could see the determination in his eyes. He didn't say a word, but his presence was enough. He gently placed her on his bullboat, the small, sturdy raft that he used for hunting trips down the river. With her safely secured, he started paddling through the fast-moving water, his strokes steady and sure. The boat rocked gently as they moved, but he kept his focus, knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult, especially with a woman who had no strength left to help. As they traveled down the river, the cold night air bit at their faces, but he didn't stop. He had been through this kind of journey before, and he knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. The river twisted and turned, and he navigated it with ease, determined to get her to safety. Hours passed, and the stars above began to shine brightly in the clear sky. The rhythmic sound of the paddle against the water was the only thing that kept him grounded. He knew that if he didn't make it to shelter soon, they would both be at risk. But there was something else driving him, something deeper than the need for survival. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a deep sense of responsibility for this woman he had just found. She had collapsed, lost and alone, and now he would be the one to bring her back to life. The journey was long, but by the time the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, they had made it to the small cabin he called home. The hunter lifted Sarah out of the boat with careful hands and carried her inside, her fragile body almost weightless in his arms. He laid her gently on the bed and wrapped her in blankets, making sure she was warm. He sat beside her, watching over her as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The hunter, though exhausted, knew he had done what needed to be done. He had saved her life, but the journey wasn't over yet. There was something he needed to learn about her, something that would change everything. The quiet, unknown connection between them had only just begun. As Sarah slowly regained consciousness, she was no longer in the wild, but in a small, dimly lit cabin. The scent of wood smoke filled the air, and the warmth from the fire crackling in the hearth seeped into her chilled bones. Her head throbbed slightly, a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. She opened her eyes slowly, the blurry outline of a man standing by the fire coming into focus. The hunter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of many years spent in the wilderness. He was preparing something by the fire, his movements smooth and practiced. Sarah tried to sit up, but her body protested, aching from the cold and exhaustion. She winced and lay back down, feeling the softness of a blanket beneath her. Her surroundings were rustic, the furniture simple but sturdy. The hunter had clearly been living off the land for years. She tried to piece together the events that had brought her here. She had been lost, wandering for days, and had collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But this man had found her, saved her. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and an unexpected twinge of something else, something she couldn't quite identify. The hunter turned as if sensing her gaze, his sharp eyes meeting hers. "You're awake," he said quietly, his voice deep and gravelly. "How are you feeling?" Sarah hesitated before answering, trying to steady her voice. I'm all right. Thank you for saving me." The hunter nodded, but said nothing for a moment, his gaze lingering on her, as if weighing something. Finally, he spoke. "You're lucky. Most wouldn't have made it this far." Sarah's heart raced as she realized just how close she had come to dying in the wilderness. "I don't remember much after I collapsed," she admitted. The hunter set down the small pot he had been holding and walked over to her. "You've been unconscious for most of the night. I brought you here after I found you. You were barely breathing." Sarah's mind was still foggy, but his words sent a chill down her spine. She had been that close to death, and yet here she was, safe. She took a deep breath, her throat dry. "I don't even know your name," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The hunter gave a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "Names aren't important out here," he said, "but you can call me Jack." He reached over to a small wooden shelf and pulled down a cup of water. "You need to drink." He handed her the cup, and she took it gratefully, feeling the cool liquid soothe her dry throat. "What happened to you?" Jack asked, his tone gentle but curious. "I mean, why were you out there alone?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She had never been one to share her troubles with others, but something about Jack made her feel safe. "I was on my way to visit family," she began. "I thought I knew the path, but I was wrong. I got lost." Jack nodded, as if this wasn't the first time he'd heard a story like hers. "The wild can be unforgiving," he said. "But you've made it this far. That means you've got some fight in you." Sarah met his gaze, wondering why she felt a strange pull toward him, something deeper than mere gratitude. Maybe it was the way he seemed to understand, or maybe it was the way he had saved her life without hesitation. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Jack didn't respond immediately, but instead turned away to tend to the fire. The crackle of the flames filled the silence between them. Sarah watched him, her thoughts swirling. She knew she needed to leave. She couldn't stay with this man forever, no matter how much he had helped her. She had a life to get back to, and answers to find. But something told her that the path ahead wasn't going to be as simple as just walking away. Jack had become a part of her story now, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. "You're welcome to stay here for as long as you need," Jack said, interrupting her thoughts. "But if you plan on leaving, it won't be easy. The woods are dangerous, especially this time of year." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had heard enough stories to know that traveling through the wilderness alone was no small feat, especially when the seasons were changing. She had to make a decision, stay or go. But deep down, she knew the journey ahead would be just as uncertain as the one that had brought her here. "I know you're feeling conflicted, Sarah," Jack said one evening as they sat by the fire. "But the wilderness doesn't care about your plans. It only cares if you're prepared or not." Sarah stared into the flames, lost in her thoughts. She had been resting here for several days, recovering physically, but emotionally, she was still adrift. Her mind kept returning to the family she was supposed to visit, the life she had left behind. She could feel the pull of the unknown, the call of a new chapter that had unexpectedly started, but she wasn't ready to leave yet. She wasn't ready to let go of the man who had saved her. But that truth seemed too complicated to face just yet. The silence between them was thick. She knew Jack wasn't forcing her to make a decision. He had offered her shelter, warmth, and safety. He had even insisted on helping her regain her strength. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. She wasn't just a lost traveler anymore. She was someone being cared for, someone who mattered to another person, someone who was being seen. She turned to him and tried to find the words to break the silence. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, "about what you said, about what comes next." Jack didn't respond right away, but glanced at her, waiting for her to continue. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I don't know if I should stay here with you or leave. I don't know if I even have a place to go anymore." Jack studied her with quiet intensity, his dark eyes unwavering. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to decide which path to take," he said softly. "But remember, every choice comes with its own weight. You've already made it this far. You're stronger than you think." Sarah nodded, though her thoughts were still jumbled. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel strong, but the doubts kept creeping in. After a long pause, Jack broke the silence again. "I know you're used to doing things on your own. I get that," he said, "but there's something to be said for letting someone else help. No one survives the wilderness alone. Not really. We all need someone." His words struck her like a gentle blow. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to survive on her own. But Jack was right. Out here, in the vast, untamed land, survival was a team effort, even if the team was just two people. She let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping. "I never planned to stay," she said, more to herself than to Jack. "I came out here looking for answers. But now I don't know. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were. I'm different now." Jack said nothing, but his presence was enough. He stood up and stretched, his muscles rippling with the easy strength of someone who had spent a lifetime living off the land. "There's no rush," he said. "You don't need to decide anything today. Let's take it one day at a time." The warmth of his words wrapped around her like the blanket she had been resting under. She wanted to believe that taking it one day at a time would make everything easier, but deep down, she knew she was already on the edge of something new. The following days passed slowly, as Sarah found herself adjusting to a rhythm she never thought she'd experience. She woke early, helped Jack with the chores, and learned more about the wilderness she had once feared. Each morning, she found herself growing stronger, physically, emotionally, and in ways she hadn't expected. The daily routines they shared began to feel like a natural part of her life. She felt connected to the land, and even more so to Jack. He had never pressed her to talk about her past or her reasons for being in the wilderness. But slowly, as they shared the quiet of the forest and the constant buzz of survival, Sarah began to open up. She told him about the loss of her family, about the way her life had crumbled after the accident. She told him about the feeling of being trapped in a life she didn't want, a life that had no purpose. And, as she spoke, she could feel the weight of her past beginning to lift. Jack listened intently, his quiet strength allowing her to share things she had never said aloud. He didn't judge, didn't offer solutions. He simply listened. It was in that silence, in the shared understanding between them, that Sarah found a new kind of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah turned to Jack, her heart full of unspoken thoughts. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jack glanced at her, his dark eyes softening. "For what?" he asked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "For everything," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what needs to be done. But I'm glad you're here." And in that moment, Sarah realized that she had found something unexpected in this wild, unforgiving land, a new beginning. Whether she stayed or went, the journey ahead would be hers to shape. But for now, she was content to let the future unfold in its own time. As the days passed, Sarah felt herself becoming more accustomed to life in the cabin. The simple rhythms of survival, gathering firewood, cooking over an open flame, mending clothes, and sharing quiet moments by the fire, began to feel like home. But while the days were peaceful, the nights were filled with unsettling thoughts. Sarah had come here seeking something, though she wasn't sure what. And now, after spending time with Jack, she was faced with an even more confusing question. What was she truly searching for? The wilderness had been a refuge from the life she had left behind, but now, as the seasons changed and the crisp air of fall settled into the valley, she was beginning to wonder if this quiet life could be her future. Jack never asked her to stay. He never pressured her to make decisions. But the unspoken bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and it was becoming harder to ignore. One afternoon, as they were tending to the animals, Sarah found herself walking beside Jack, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't shared. The quiet between them felt heavier than usual, and she felt the urge to speak. "Jack," she said hesitantly, "do you think I'm ready to leave this place?" Jack glanced at her, but didn't respond immediately. His gaze lingered on the horizon, where the distant mountains stood as a silent testament to the vast, untamed wilderness around them. "I think you'll know when you're ready," he said softly, his voice steady and reassuring. "It's not about being ready for the outside world. It's about being ready for yourself." His words struck a chord deep within her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity. She had spent so much time running from her past, from the expectations of others, from the life she had thought she was supposed to live. But in the quiet company of this man, in the wild and untamed land, she had found something else, herself. As the days grew colder, the leaves turning shades of gold and red, Sarah knew that it was time to make a choice. She had been given a gift, this life in the wilderness, this refuge from the world, and now she had to decide if she would embrace it or return to the life she had left behind. One evening, as the first frost of the season covered the ground, Sarah and Jack sat in front of the fire, the warmth from the flames casting flickering shadows on the cabin walls. Sarah had been quiet all evening, lost in thought. Jack noticed and waited for her to speak. "Jack," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I need to know, if I leave, will you be all right?" Jack's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the fire. "I've been alone out here for a long time," he said, his voice low. "But that doesn't mean I want to be. You've brought something to this place I didn't know I needed, someone to share it with." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had come to care for him, more than she had expected. "I don't want to hold you back," she whispered. Jack's eyes met hers then, and in that moment, she could see the weight of the years he had spent alone in the wilderness, the quiet strength he had built through solitude. "You're not holding me back," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You're giving me a reason to keep going." The words hung between them, full of unspoken promises and uncertain futures. Sarah knew that leaving wouldn't be easy, but neither would staying. There was no right answer, no perfect choice. But she also knew that sometimes, the hardest decisions were the ones that led to the most unexpected and rewarding paths. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Sarah made her decision. She wasn't ready to leave the wilderness, not yet. She wasn't ready to return to the life she had once known. But she wasn't alone anymore. Jack was right. She had found herself here, in this wild place, in this quiet cabin with him. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to stay. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Sarah stood by the door of the cabin, looking out at the vast wilderness that stretched before her. The world was still and quiet, waiting. Jack stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "Ready for today?" he asked, his voice full of quiet optimism. Sarah nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Ready," she said, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. Together, as the days passed, Sarah and Jack settled into a routine. Their time together felt natural, as though they had been living this way for years. The mornings were spent gathering firewood, tending to the small garden outside, and checking the traps they had set the night before. Jack showed Sarah how to track animals through the woods, how to navigate the river, and how to read the subtle signs of the forest. She learned quickly, her confidence growing with every lesson. Jack, though quiet, was a patient teacher, and Sarah found herself enjoying the simplicity of their life in the cabin. It wasn't just survival that she had come to appreciate. It was the way Jack never asked for anything in return, the way he made sure she was safe and well, without ever pushing her to make decisions she wasn't ready to face. She had never felt more at peace, yet the quiet of the cabin also gave her plenty of time to think about the life she had left behind, her family, the small town she grew up in, the life that had once felt like a map she could follow. But in the solitude of the wilderness, Sarah knew she was no longer the same person. The woman she was here was different from the one she had been. She was beginning to understand what Jack had meant when he said she had to be ready for herself. One evening, as they sat outside near the fire, Sarah turned to him with a question that had been lingering in her mind for days. "Jack, do you ever miss the world outside? The one we left behind?" Jack didn't look at her immediately. He stared into the flames, the light reflecting in his eyes. "I used to," he said after a long pause. "But over the years, the wilderness became everything I needed. It teaches you what's real, what's worth holding on to." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his words. She had been thinking about returning to the world she knew, to reconnect with the people she had left behind. But Jack's words made her hesitate. Was it worth going back? What had she left for? She had no answers yet, but she knew she couldn't stay here forever. One morning, as the first frost of winter settled over the valley, Sarah awoke early to find Jack standing outside, looking out toward the distant mountains. There was a faraway look in his eyes, as if he was searching for something he couldn't quite find. "Jack?" she called softly, stepping outside and joining him. "What is it?" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I've been thinking about the past," he said quietly. "There are things I've done, things I've left behind. You're not the only one who's running from something." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had known Jack had a past, but she hadn't realized how much of it haunted him. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," she said, her voice soft. Jack looked at her, his gaze steady. "I don't mind. It's just, sometimes it's hard to move forward when you're carrying the weight of what you've done." He turned back, toward the mountains, his posture tense. "I thought this life out here would give me peace. But sometimes, the past doesn't let go so easily." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We all have a past, Jack," she said, her voice firm but kind. "But it doesn't have to define us. You've made a new life here, one that's yours. And that's what matters now." Jack turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, the only sound between them. Finally, Jack nodded, a slight smile breaking through his otherwise stoic expression. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been holding on to things I can't change." Sarah smiled back at him, feeling a sense of relief that she hadn't known she needed. The weight of his words hung in the air, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. They didn't need to speak further about the past. They had already moved past it. That evening, as they prepared the cabin for the coming winter storm, Sarah found herself thinking about Jack's words. They had both come to this place seeking something: peace, safety, freedom. And though they had found it, there was still a sense that they were both waiting for something more. As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, Sarah stood by the window, watching the world outside grow still and quiet. She knew that the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. And that thought, more than anything, made her feel that everything would be all right. As the days grew shorter and the first heavy snows blanketed the land, Sarah found herself standing at a crossroads. She had made her peace with the wilderness, with the life Jack had shown her. But as the seasons shifted, so did the weight of decisions that had been lingering in her mind. The question of leaving or staying was no longer just about the physical world around her. It was about the future, her future. The fire crackled softly in the hearth of the small cabin as she sat by the window, staring out at the vast wilderness. The storm had begun hours ago, and the wind howled like a wild animal. Jack was at the door, checking the weather and securing their supplies for the coming days. He had always been methodical, every step a part of his routine, but today he seemed distracted, as if the storm outside mirrored something inside him. Sarah looked over at him, wondering if he felt the same unease that had taken root in her heart. She had come to this place to escape, to heal, but now, with the storm settling in, she knew she had to face something deeper. Jack stepped inside, his face flushed from the cold. He looked at her, his eyes steady but filled with something Sarah couldn't quite name. "We've made it through worse storms," he said, his voice calm. "This one will pass too." Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. "Jack, what happens when the storm doesn't pass?" she asked quietly. He tilted his head slightly, walking over to the fire and stoking the embers. "What do you mean?" I'm not talking about the weather," she said, her voice faltering as she looked up at him. "I'm talking about us. About what we're doing here. About what's next." Jack paused, the flickering light from the fire dancing across his rugged features. For a moment, there was silence between them, a heavy silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Then, Jack spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I don't know what's next, Sarah. I never have." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years spent alone, wandering through the wilderness with only the sound of the wind and the crack of a rifle for company. "But we can't keep running, can we?" Sarah whispered. Jack turned, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm not running," he said quietly. "I'm just waiting for something to make sense." Sarah stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting by the fire for too long. "I came here looking for peace," she said, stepping closer to him. "I thought it would be simple. But now I don't know if I can find it, or if I even deserve it." Jack reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. "You deserve peace," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "Everyone does." His touch was warm, grounding her, and for a moment, Sarah closed her eyes, letting herself breathe deeply. "I thought I could run away from everything. From my past, from the decisions I've made, from the life I left behind," she admitted. "But it's still with me, Jack, and I don't know how to let go of it." Jack's hand remained on her arm, and he looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time in a new light. "The past has a way of following us," he said slowly, "but it doesn't have to control us. We can choose what we do with it. You've survived the wilderness, Sarah. You've come further than you think." Sarah met his gaze, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. Maybe it wasn't about running away. Maybe it was about facing the storm, both the one outside and the one within. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding and start living again. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in a thick, white silence. The storm was far from over, but in that moment, Sarah realized that the storm she needed to face wasn't the one outside. It was the one inside her own heart. Jack stood there, waiting for her, his steady presence offering the comfort she had been searching for all along. As the night stretched on, Sarah knew that her journey wasn't over. But now, she didn't feel so alone in it. With Jack by her side, and the wilderness surrounding them, she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, the storm raged outside, the winds howling against the walls of the small cabin, but inside, there was a calm that Sarah had not felt in a long time. The fire crackled softly, casting warm, flickering light across the room as she sat by the hearth, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Jack was sitting across from her, his eyes thoughtful, watching the flames dance. The tension between them from earlier had dissolved, replaced by an unspoken understanding. They had both faced their pasts, and while the storm outside still raged, there was a quiet peace between them. Jack broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "You've been here for a while now, Sarah. Have you thought about what you want?" Sarah looked up from her tea, her gaze meeting his. She had been thinking about that question for days. It was the same question that had been haunting her since she first arrived in the wilderness. What did she want? It wasn't as simple as survival anymore. She had found peace here, yes, but was it enough? "I don't know," she said honestly, her voice soft. "I thought I wanted to run away from everything. But now, I'm not so sure." Jack nodded slowly, as though he understood exactly what she meant. Running away doesn't always lead to what we're looking for. Sometimes it just takes us further from ourselves. Sarah took a deep breath, letting his words settle in. "I've been thinking a lot about my family, about the life I left behind," she continued. "But now, with everything that's happened here, I'm starting to wonder if I'm looking for something else. Something that's been missing." Jack stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Sometimes, it's not about finding something. It's about letting go of what holds us back," he said, his voice carrying a quiet wisdom. Sarah watched him for a moment before speaking again. "Do you think I'm ready to go back? Or should I stay here?" Jack turned to face her, his expression serious but kind. "That's a decision only you can make. No one else can tell you what's right for you. But remember, staying here isn't just about running away from the past. It's about building a future. Your future." His words echoed in her mind as she processed them. She had spent so much time running, trying to escape the pain of her past, but now, for the first time, she understood that she wasn't just running away. She was choosing to move forward. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. The snowstorm outside showed no signs of letting up, but Sarah knew that the storm inside her had passed. She had found peace in this place, But more importantly, she had found a sense of clarity she hadn't known she was searching for. She stood up, feeling a new resolve settle in her chest. "I think I need to stay," she said, her voice steady. Jack raised an eyebrow, as if surprised, but his eyes softened. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone gentle. Sarah nodded. "I don't know what's next, but I think I need to stay here and figure it out. I can't go back to the way things were. I'm not the same person anymore." Jack smiled, a rare, genuine smile that warmed Sarah's heart. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together," he said simply. It wasn't a promise, but it felt like one. In that moment, Sarah realized that she wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had found her place. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cabin, Sarah felt a calm that she hadn't known she was capable of. She was ready to face whatever came next, not with fear, but with hope. As the fire crackled and the wind howled, she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with Jack by her side, she felt that, whatever happened, they would make it through. Together. The days that followed felt like a dream, a life that Sarah had never expected but had somehow found. The cabin was their home, a place of comfort in the harsh winter wilderness. It had been a week since she had made the decision to stay, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of her past lift just a little more. Jack's presence had become as steady as the landscape around them, and together, they had settled into a rhythm of living. It wasn't perfect. They both had scars, hidden ones, deep ones, but in this quiet, isolated life, they had found something neither of them had expected: peace. Sarah had spent the mornings learning more about the wilderness, following Jack on long walks through the snow-covered forest, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, and the world was wrapped in stillness. The afternoons were spent by the fire, reading, mending clothes, or tending to the small garden they had started. Despite the cold, Sarah had found a sense of purpose in the small tasks. It wasn't the life she had once imagined for herself, but it was a life that felt real, a life she could build. Jack had taught her to read the sky, to predict the weather by the patterns of the clouds, and to track animals through the snow. He shared with her the skills he had learned in his years alone, but it wasn't just survival he had taught her, it was trust. One afternoon, as they were walking back from checking the traps, Sarah turned to Jack with a question that had been on her mind for a while. "Jack, what happens if something goes wrong? If something happens to us out here?" Jack paused, his eyes scanning the snow-covered path ahead. The question wasn't a fear she had voiced before, but the reality of their isolated life weighed on her. "If something happens," he said slowly, "we take care of it. Together. We adapt, we survive, and we don't face it alone." His words were simple, but there was something in them that comforted her. It was the way he said it, with such quiet confidence, that made her believe in the possibility of their survival. But it wasn't just about surviving. It was about the way they had come to rely on each other, the way they had built something together in the midst of a world that had once felt so cold. The storm of the past seemed to have passed, but the storm of their shared future had only just begun. As the sun began to set that evening, casting long shadows across the snow, Sarah felt a shift in the air. The peaceful calm that had enveloped them was about to change. Jack had been acting strange all day, distracted, tense. She had noticed the way he kept glancing toward the horizon, as if waiting for something. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with something she couldn't quite place. "We might not be alone anymore," he said. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I've seen tracks in the snow. Fresh ones. And they don't belong to any animals I know," he explained. "They're human tracks. Someone else is out here." Sarah's stomach twisted in fear. They had been alone for so long, isolated in their little corner of the wilderness. The thought of someone else out there was unsettling. "Are they dangerous?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't answer right away. He stood still, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know yet," he finally said. "But we need to be prepared." That night, as they sat by the fire, the crackle of the flames seemed louder than usual, the shadows darker. Sarah could feel the weight of Jack's words pressing on her chest. There was a shift in the air, a sense of impending change. The calm they had come to rely on was slipping away, and they were about to face a new challenge. As the hours passed, and the wind howled outside, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. The world outside the cabin had always felt so vast, so empty. But now, in the silence of the winter night, the wilderness felt full of possibilities, both dangerous and unknown. The next morning, as they prepared to face whatever the tracks might lead to, Sarah found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about survival. This life they had built, this peace they had found, was fragile. The world they had created out here was a sanctuary, but it was also exposed. She had come to this place seeking answers, seeking peace, but she hadn't expected it to come at the cost of her safety. She hadn't expected the past to catch up with her so soon. Jack was already checking the gear, his movements calm and precise. He had always known how to handle danger, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept scanning the horizon. She could sense that he was preparing for something he wasn't telling her. And in that moment, she realized that, for all the peace they had found, they weren't done yet. The wilderness had its own rules, and they were about to face them head-on. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew that Jack was right. They would face it together. And whatever happened, they would survive. The following day dawned cold and gray, the sky overcast with thick clouds, as if mirroring the heavy weight of uncertainty that now hung over Sarah and Jack. They had spent the night preparing for what lay ahead, their minds racing with possibilities. Jack had checked their supplies, ensuring they had enough food, ammunition, and firewood for the days ahead. But even with all their preparations, the unknown remained just beyond their reach. The tracks Jack had spotted were fresh, but they didn't give away much. The intruder, whoever they were, had been careful, leaving no obvious sign of their intentions. Sarah had tried to shake off the unease that had settled in her chest, but it lingered, gnawing at her. As Jack secured the last of the gear, he turned to Sarah, his expression grim but resolute. "We'll need to be cautious," he said, his voice low and steady. "I don't know who's out there, but if they're looking for trouble, we'll be ready." Sarah nodded, though the sense of dread continued to build inside her. She had come to the wilderness for peace, but now it felt like they were teetering on the edge of something dangerous. The silence between them was thick, both of them acutely aware of the threat that loomed over their small, fragile world. Jack led the way out of the cabin, his boots crunching against the snow, the cold air biting at their faces. They moved cautiously, sticking to the narrow paths they knew well, the trees towering above them like silent watchers. The forest seemed quieter today, the usual sounds of wildlife eerily absent. Sarah's heart raced as she scanned their surroundings, every crack of a branch or rustle in the underbrush making her jump. She wasn't used to feeling this exposed, this vulnerable. The hours passed slowly as they trekked deeper into the woods, Jack keeping a careful eye out for any sign of the tracks he had seen earlier. But it wasn't until late in the afternoon, when the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees, that they finally came upon something. A small clearing, barely visible through the thick trees, revealed the remnants of a campfire. The charred wood, still warm to the touch, told them that the person, or persons, hadn't been gone long. Jack knelt by the fire, his eyes scanning the area. "This is recent," he muttered. "They're close." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. They weren't just dealing with someone lost in the woods. They were dealing with someone who knew exactly where they were. Someone who had been watching. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Jack stood, his gaze still fixed on the ground, his mind working through the possibilities. "We keep moving. We don't let them know we're onto them." They continued through the trees, every step bringing them closer to whatever lay ahead. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, the snow thicker underfoot. The light was fading fast, the evening creeping in, and Sarah could feel the growing sense of danger all around them. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts as she tried to stay close to Jack, the unease gnawing at her. It wasn't long before they saw it. Through the thickening trees, a faint silhouette appeared in the distance. A figure, standing still, watching them. Sarah's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to speak, to warn Jack, but the words wouldn't come. The figure didn't move, just stood there, like a shadow in the snow. Jack's hand subtly shifted to the rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure remained motionless, and for a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. Sarah could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she took a step back, trying to remain hidden behind Jack. They were so close now, the figure just a few yards away, but still silent, still watching. Jack didn't wait any longer. He stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond immediately, and Sarah's anxiety grew with each passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the figure spoke, their voice barely above a whisper, carried on the wind. "I'm not here to hurt you," the voice said, rough and tired. "I'm just trying to survive." Jack didn't lower his rifle, but his stance shifted slightly, more cautious now than defensive. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice steady. The figure took a slow step forward, enough for Sarah to see a faint outline of their face in the dimming light. It was a man, his features weathered and tired, his clothes ragged. "Name's Owen," the man replied, his voice tinged with desperation. "I've been lost out here for days. Didn't mean no harm." Jack didn't lower his rifle but nodded, signaling to Sarah to stay where she was. "You've been following us?" Jack asked, his tone sharp. Owen's eyes flickered to the ground, then back to Jack. "I didn't know who you were, just saw the smoke from your fire," he explained, his voice strained. "I'm just looking for food. I've got nothing left." The silence between them stretched on, the weight of Jack's judgment pressing heavily on the situation. Sarah could see that Jack was considering his options, his mind running through the possibilities. They couldn't trust this stranger, especially not out here, but they couldn't just leave him to fend for himself either. Jack looked back at Sarah for a moment, then back at Owen. "You can come back with us," he said, his voice hard but not unkind. "But you follow the rules. No questions. No trouble." Owen nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you. I'll do whatever you need." As Sarah and Jack turned to lead Owen back to the cabin, the weight of their decision settled in. They didn't know if they could trust him, but they had made their choice. In the wilderness, trust was something that had to be earned, one step at a time. The journey back to the cabin with Owen was silent but tense. Sarah could feel the weight of the decision they had made pressing down on her. Jack led the way, his rifle in hand, with Owen following a few paces behind. The snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, and the forest around them felt darker than usual. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Who was Owen really? What was he doing out here alone? Why hadn't he mentioned where he had come from, or why he was so far from civilization? She glanced over at Jack, whose expression was unreadable, focused on the path ahead. They had made the decision to help this man, but trust was something that had to be earned out here in the wilderness. Every stranger could be a threat, and Jack knew that better than anyone. As they reached the cabin, Jack motioned for Owen to stay outside while he and Sarah went in first. "We'll make sure it's safe," Jack said quietly to Owen, before turning to Sarah. They stepped inside, shutting the door behind them. The warmth of the fire and the scent of wood smoke welcomed them. "What do you think?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Jack rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I don't know. Something about him doesn't sit right. But we don't have much choice right now." Sarah's heart raced. "You don't trust him?" Jack hesitated, his gaze distant as he stared into the flames. "I don't trust anyone completely out here. Not anymore." He looked at Sarah then, his eyes softening. "But I'm not going to turn him away. Not yet. We'll keep an eye on him." Sarah nodded, feeling a knot form in her stomach. She understood. In the wilderness, trust was a luxury, and survival depended on vigilance. But what if they were wrong? What if Owen was more than just a man looking for help? They returned to the door and let Owen inside. His eyes immediately darted around the cabin, taking in the modest furnishings, the fire burning in the hearth, the sparse but functional kitchen. He seemed to relax a little, but Sarah could still sense an unease about him. "Thank you," Owen said, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure I'd make it out there much longer." Jack didn't respond immediately, instead offering him a seat by the fire. "Warm up. We'll figure out what to do next." Owen nodded and sat down, his movements stiff. Jack went to the kitchen to prepare a simple meal of stew and bread, while Sarah set to work adding more wood to the fire. The cabin felt smaller with a third person inside, the air thicker, as if the walls were closing in. Sarah found herself glancing at Owen more than once, watching the way he avoided looking directly at either of them. When Jack returned with a bowl of food for Owen, the silence grew even heavier. Owen hesitated before taking the bowl, his fingers trembling slightly as he grasped it. "What's your story, Owen?" Jack asked as he sat down, his eyes narrowing. Owen looked up, surprised by the directness of the question. My story, he repeated, as if unsure of how to answer. I told you, I'm just trying to survive. I got separated from a group I was with, and things didn't go as planned. Sarah watched him closely, but there was something about the way he spoke that didn't add up. His story was vague, and he was dodging the question. She didn't like it. Where were you headed? Sarah asked, trying to probe a little deeper. Owen shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the door before returning to the fire. Just north. I thought I might find a settlement, but I got turned around. Jack gave Sarah a knowing look, then turned back to Owen. You're lucky we found you. You don't seem like the kind of man to get lost out here. Owen's gaze hardened for a moment before he sighed. I'm not. But sometimes, things go wrong. Things you don't expect. The room fell silent again, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Sarah exchanged another glance with Jack. They both knew something was off, but neither of them could put their finger on it. We'll talk more in the morning, Jack said, breaking the silence. You need rest. Owen nodded and seemed to relax a bit, though there was still tension in his posture. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look before standing up. I'll take the first watch, Jack said. You get some sleep. Sarah hesitated but nodded. As she lay down in bed that night, the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the cabin couldn't ease the anxiety that had settled in her chest. She kept thinking about Owen's words, the gaps in his story. Her mind raced as she listened to the wind outside, wondering what lay ahead. What if he wasn't just lost? What if he had come for something else? The question gnawed at her as she closed her eyes, but no answers came. All she knew was that she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The next morning, they would have to decide if they could trust Owen. But in the wilderness, trust was earned, and the road ahead was uncertain. They had made their choice to bring him in, but the true test was yet to come. The morning after their uneasy night with Owen, the tension in the cabin was palpable. Jack stood at the window, looking out over the snow-covered landscape, his expression unreadable. Sarah had woken early, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something, but she wasn't sure what. Owen had settled into the cabin the night before, but something about him still felt off. He had shared enough to gain their temporary trust, but not enough to answer their lingering questions. The cold light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the floor, and for a moment, the cabin felt too small, too confining. The world outside, vast and wild, felt far more free. We can't keep him here forever, Sarah said, breaking the silence. Her voice sounded louder than she had intended. Jack didn't turn around immediately, but his body stiffened. I know, he said quietly, his voice thick with thought. He turned to face her. But we don't have much choice right now. We can't risk sending him out into the cold without knowing what he's capable of. Sarah nodded, though the unease still gripped her. Do you think he's telling the truth? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's gaze lingered on her. For a moment before he replied, I don't know. People out here, they tell stories to survive. Some truths are stretched. Some lies are told to keep you alive. Sarah couldn't argue with that. She had seen it herself. How people changed in the wilderness. How desperation shaped the stories they told. The fire crackled softly behind them, but it didn't ease the chill that had settled in her chest. After a moment, Jack moved toward the table, checking the weapons they had ready. He made sure the rifles were loaded and the knives were sharp. Every preparation felt like a decision that could determine their survival. I think we need to know more about him, Jack finally said. If he's really on his own, he won't last long out there without shelter. Sarah met his gaze, understanding the unspoken question. They couldn't afford to let him go yet, not without figuring out what he was hiding. I'll talk to him, she said, her voice steady. Jack didn't object. He simply nodded and turned back to his preparations. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped outside to find Owen. The cold air hit her like a slap to the face, but she welcomed it. The sharpness of the air cleared her thoughts. She found Owen sitting near the edge of the woods, his back to her, staring out at the trees. He had been quiet since they had arrived back at the cabin the night before, his eyes constantly darting around, as though waiting for something. Owen, Sarah called softly, taking a cautious step toward him. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. You're wondering if you made the right choice, he said, his voice a low murmur. If I'm dangerous. Sarah didn't deny it. I don't know you, Owen, she said carefully. I don't know why you're out here alone or what you're running from. Owen stood up slowly, brushing snow from his clothes. His eyes, once guarded, softened just slightly. I'm not running from anyone, he said quietly. I'm running towards something. Survival. Sarah watched him carefully, trying to read him. You said you were separated from a group. Where are they? Why haven't they come looking for you? Owen hesitated, his gaze drifting to the ground. They're gone, he said, his voice raw. They didn't make it. I'm the last. One left. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. Sarah could see the pain in his eyes, the truth behind his words. But there was still a piece of him he wasn't revealing. I know what it's like, she said gently, her voice softening. To lose everything. Owen's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something, a memory, a regret. He seemed to struggle with himself before speaking again. You don't know what it's like to have your world fall apart, he said, the edge in his voice returning. To be left with nothing but the wild. The cold. The hunger. Sarah took a step closer, but didn't speak, waiting for him to finish. I had a family, he whispered. A wife. A daughter. But they're gone. The storm came, and we were caught out there. He swallowed hard. I was the only one who made it. His words were like a dagger, and Sarah could see the burden of loss he carried. For a moment, there was silence. Sarah let his words settle, understanding now that his journey wasn't just about survival. It was about grief and guilt, and the weight of carrying memories too painful to bear. Owen, she said softly, you don't have to keep running. He shook his head, his eyes hardening once more. You don't understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Out here, you don't stop running. If you do, you die. The words hung in the air, and Sarah realized then that she wasn't just talking to a man who had been lost in the wilderness. She was talking to a man who had lost everything, and the wilderness was his only refuge. They stood there for a long moment, the wind picking up as the trees swayed in the distance. Sarah finally spoke again, her voice quiet but firm. You can stay. You can help us. But if you're going to be here, you have to stop running. Owen's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something, some acceptance, some acknowledgement that he might not be alone in this anymore. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. All right, he said, his voice softening. I'll stay. The tension that had hung between them began to ease, and for the first time since they had brought Owen into their home, Sarah felt like the choice they had made might have been the right one. The road ahead wasn't clear, but they were no longer facing it alone. The days that followed Owen's decision to stay felt like a fragile calm before the storm. With each passing hour, the three of them, Sarah, Jack, and Owen, fell into a new rhythm. Owen worked hard to prove his worth, helping with the firewood, setting traps, and learning the ways of the land. Sarah, though cautious, had seen enough to believe that he was genuine in his desire to survive. But there was still something about him, a lingering unease, that she couldn't shake. Jack had been more distant than usual, his eyes scanning the horizon every time they stepped outside, as if he was waiting for something to happen. He trusted Owen to an extent, but his wariness hadn't faded. Sarah understood why. Trust was something they couldn't afford to give lightly, and yet, they had to rely on each other. They were a small, isolated group now, and out here, even the smallest shift in their balance could have serious consequences. One evening, after a long day of work, the three of them sat around the fire. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving behind a clear, star-filled sky. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room, but Sarah could feel the cold undercurrent of tension that had settled between them. You've been quiet tonight, she said to Jack, breaking the silence. He glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. Just thinking, he replied. His voice was low, contemplative. Sarah had learned to read him by now. Jack wasn't the kind of man to speak much, but when he did, there was weight to his words. About what? She asked, her curiosity piqued. Jack sighed, rubbing his hand through his hair. About everything, he said slowly. The past. The future. What we're doing out here. Sarah nodded. She knew what he meant. They had both left so much behind, but the weight of their pasts wasn't something that could be outrun. It followed them, sometimes in the form of memories, other times as an uncomfortable silence. Do you ever think about going back? She asked. It was a question that had been on her mind for days, though she hadn't had the courage to ask it out loud until now. Jack was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the fire. Finally, he shook his head. I've made my peace with it. I don't think I could go back, even if I wanted to. Sarah watched him, sensing that there was more he wasn't saying, but she didn't press. She could tell this was something he didn't want to talk about. They had both built new lives in the wilderness, in their small cabin, in this fragile peace they had found. But the past was always lurking, waiting to remind them of what they had lost. I don't know if I can ever go back, she said quietly. But sometimes I wonder if we ever really leave it behind. Jack met her eyes then, and in that moment, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected: understanding. He wasn't just the man who had saved her in the wilderness. He was someone who had also been lost, someone who had been running, just like her. We can't outrun the past, Sarah, he said softly. But we can choose to live in the present. We're here. We're alive. And that has to count for something. His words struck a chord deep within her. She had spent so much time looking back, haunted by the life she had left behind, that she hadn't fully embraced the life she was building now. She realized that Jack was right. They couldn't change the past, but they could shape their future. As the night wore on and the fire began to die down, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from escaping, but from acceptance. She wasn't running anymore. She was here, with Jack and Owen, in this cabin in the wilderness, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel so alone. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Owen continued to prove himself, working alongside Jack to prepare for the coming winter. He had learned quickly, and although Sarah was still cautious, she could see that he was genuinely trying to fit in. Jack had started to let his guard down, slowly but surely. They were building something together, and Sarah found herself starting to trust Owen, despite the lingering doubts she couldn't quite shake. The cabin became a home, and the woods around them, once threatening and foreign, began to feel like a place they belonged. But even as Sarah settled into this new life, the question that had been haunting her still lingered. What if their peace was just an illusion? One evening, as they were finishing up dinner, Owen spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. I need to tell you something, he said, looking at Sarah and Jack. Sarah's stomach tightened. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. What did he need to tell them? What is it? Jack asked, his voice calm but wary. Owen hesitated, then spoke. I'm not alone out here. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady, though she could feel her pulse quicken. Owen's gaze flickered to the door, as if he was afraid someone might be listening. There are others, he said, his voice low. People like me. People who don't want to be found. Sarah and Jack exchanged a look, both of them sensing the gravity of his words. This wasn't just about survival anymore. They weren't just trying to stay alive in the wilderness. They were about to face something far more dangerous, something that had been out there all along, something that had been watching them. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The fire crackled softly in the background, but the danger felt much closer now. Sarah knew that whatever was coming, it was going to change everything, and they were running out of time. The words hung in the air between Sarah, Jack, and Owen, heavy with uncertainty. Others, Owen had said. It wasn't just a stray comment, it was a warning, an admission. Jack and Sarah stood frozen, the firelight flickering against their faces, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and loom like the very unknown that Owen had brought with him. Who are they? Sarah finally managed to ask, her voice tight with the unease that had been growing ever since Owen had arrived. Owen shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes flickering to the door again. People who are, like me. Survivors, outcasts, people who've learned to survive by whatever means necessary. They're not all friendly, and they don't like outsiders. Jack's gaze sharpened, the protective instincts that had kept him alive in the wild for so long kicking in. How many? He asked, his voice calm but tense. Owen hesitated. Enough to make it dangerous, he replied finally. I'm not the only one who's been trying to stay hidden. If they find out I'm here, they'll come looking. And if they find you with me, well, you won't be safe either. The weight of his words pressed down on them both. Sarah felt her heart race. She had come here for peace, for solitude, to escape everything that had chased her. But now it seemed that peace was slipping away, like the last warmth of a dying fire. What do we do? Sarah asked, her voice quiet, though she knew the answer. Jack exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. We prepare, he said simply. We don't know when they'll come, but we know they will. And when they do, We'll be ready." The room fell into a tense silence. Sarah felt a wave of anxiety rush over her. She had known that the wilderness could be cruel. But this was different. These weren't just the dangers of nature. These were people, and they weren't the kind of people she could trust. "How can we trust you, Owen?" Sarah asked, her voice softer now, but the doubt still lingered. "How do we know you're not part of them?" Owen flinched, the accusation cutting deeper than she had intended. He looked at the floor, his fingers curling into fists. "I'm not part of them," he said quietly. "I've been running from them just as much as I've been running from the past. I didn't want to bring this to you, but now you're involved. And I'm sorry for that." Sarah studied him for a long moment, weighing his words, the vulnerability in his voice, and the tension in his posture. She had been cautious from the start, and now, more than ever, her instincts were telling her to tread carefully. But Jack was right. They didn't have time for hesitation. Whatever this group was, whatever threat they posed, it was coming for them. "We have no choice but to trust him, for now," Jack said, breaking the silence. "But we'll keep our eyes open. We prepare, and we stay vigilant." The hours that followed were filled with a quiet urgency. Jack began fortifying the cabin, checking the windows, the door, and the surrounding area for any signs of danger. Sarah helped where she could, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Fear, anger, confusion, but she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't afford to be complacent. This wasn't just about surviving the wilderness anymore. This was about survival against other people. As night fell, Jack stood at the door, watching the snow fall gently outside, the world outside seeming peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the trees. Sarah sat by the fire, her mind a swirl of thoughts and plans. Owen sat near her, his gaze distant, lost in his own thoughts. The tension was palpable, but for a moment, it felt like they were just three people trying to survive, trying to make it through another night. But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for their lives. "We'll leave at first light," Jack said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "We'll head for the old cabin by the creek. It's farther from here, and it's defensible." Owen nodded, his face grim. "I know the place. It's as good a spot as any." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. It was clear that Jack was preparing for a fight, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. She had come to this wilderness to escape, but now it seemed like escape wasn't an option. As she lay down that night, her mind buzzing with everything that had happened, she couldn't shake the thought that they had crossed a line. The peace she had found here was fragile, and the people who had brought her that peace might be the same ones who would take it away. The world outside was quiet, the snow falling softly on the ground, but inside the cabin, Sarah could feel the storm rising. It was no longer just about surviving in the wilderness. It was about surviving each other. And whatever was coming, she knew that the fight for their lives was just beginning. When the first light of day broke through the cabin's small window, Sarah felt the weight of the decision. They had no choice now. The world outside had changed, and they would have to change with it. The storm was coming, and they would face it together.